Hello, I am SP Basavaraj. In this video, I will be talking about the famous Newton's rings experiment. I will be telling you how you can find the radius of curvature of the given plano convex lens by setting up Newton's rings. This one, unlike my other videos of VTU experiments, is a detailed one. It's rather lengthy because of these reasons. Newton's rings experiment is one in which considerable amount of practical skill is involved. While you try to set up the Newton's rings experiment, you may just fail to get the rings. It's obviously because of overlooking certain critical adjustments you must have done to start with. There are many possible pitfalls in which you may get trapped and unable to get out of them. As an examiner in practical examinations, I have seen sometimes even intelligent students struggling to get the rings despite having a good knowledge of the experiment. The reasons were many. Some missed out on the principle of operation of the traveling microscope, some had taken for granted the initial settings, and some had unknowingly disturbed some critical settings which they themselves had done earlier, and some such problems. But every one of those problems could be solved within a matter of few minutes, provided you are aware of why it happens. In other words, you must be having an insight into the things involved in setting up the experiment. In this talk, I have suggested the precautions you must undertake for a trouble-free performance. The basic need to solve any problem is you must be knowing about both the idea behind the experimental setup and about the principle of working of the instrument, namely the microscope. First of all, you must be knowing about its individual parts such as eyepiece, objective, reticle, and also about the rack and pinion movement. That knowledge will help you foresee the problems and then getting the rings without much difficulty. That's one part. The other part is to be aware how you must set the traveling microscope ready for taking readings. Without initializing the settings in the traveling microscope, things will certainly go wrong later. And at the end, your observations may give you just the headache instead of any sensible result. Okay, now onwards, for the sake of convenience in this talk, let me call the traveling microscope simply as TM. Talking about the TM, you know there are two types of TMs with which this experiment could be carried out. One is the micrometer type and the other one is the vernier type. As the name itself suggests, the micrometer type TM works on the principle of micrometer, the same principle on which the screw gauge works. The vernier type TM works on the principle discovered by the French mathematician Pierre Vernier, who lived in the early part of 17th century. I have given the explanation here as applicable to a micrometer type TM. Micrometer type TM happens to be the more popular one. The setup I describe here consists of instruments all made by Kamaljit Instruments, Bangalore. I will start with the various adjustments and problems as a list and afterwards go into the details of how to tackle them one by one. There are two critical adjustments you must do with the TM before you begin taking the readings. First two are related to the reference lines. You know, in the TM there are two reference line marks marked 0 next to them. One is for the head scale and the other one is for the pitch scale. To begin with, you must set the 0 of the head scale on the drum with its reference line and then set any one of the pitch scale graduations aligned with the pitch scale reference line. The third adjustment is against what is known as the backlash error. All micrometer type TMs almost always have a backlash error. They acquire this problem gradually within a month or two after they are put to use in the lab after they arrive there as a brand new instrument. It's simply because of the wear and tear of the threads on the screw in the instrument. You should be absolutely careful about this error also. If you don't take care of all these three factors, you are likely to end up with a mess of measurements. Added to these three, there are other possible pitfalls also, like that of 135-degree inclination of the reflector, plane face of the lens on the plane glass plate, and similar problems. Even one of these is enough to play spoil sport in your experiment and frustrate you. However, forewarned, as we all know, is being forearmed. I have explained each of these issues in the next discussion and suggested remedies to every one of them. They are all simple anyway. For easy grasping of what I try to explain, I have added a good number of very short videos wherever possible. Okay, let me start. Let me begin with the TM. Here you see three images of a micrometer type TM viewed from three perpendicular directions. One from the front, one from the side and the other one from above, but slightly angular as viewed from the side of the performer. The sodium light source lies opposite of the TM's front. Incidentally, if you are interested in knowing how a sodium lamp functions, then you may watch my other video in the history of Newton's rings, for which the link is given in the description below. Now let's know about the parts of the microscope. First, the objective. It is at the lower end of the tube. Since it is the nearest part of the microscope to the object under observation, that end is accordingly called objective. Inside it, there is a small lens fixed within the tube. That lens itself magnifies the image 10 times. Technically to say, it has a magnification power of 10. Now come to the other end of the microscope. There you see the eyepiece. Here what you see at the top is the eyepiece. It is the end of the microscope where we view with one of our eyes. Hence the name eyepiece. Unlike the objective, it is not a single lens and is not even a fixed part. It's a small cylindrical shaped unit, an inch and a half long, with both ends having a lens each, kept separated by a constant distance. It is designed by Ramsden and hence called Ramsden's eyepiece. Its dia is just right to slide in and out of the tube and can also stay in a soft grip without slipping through if left at a point in between. Its jagged upper end makes it easy for us to catch between our fingertips. Also with its larger dia, it acts as a stopper when the eyepiece is pushed completely inside the tube. The eyepiece itself has a magnification of 10, which is shown as 10x. Its job is to magnify further the already magnified image provided by the objective. Within the tube, just below the position of the eyepiece, there is a thin plain circular glass plate on which two fine diametrically lines are etched perpendicular to each other. It looks like a plus mark. That's what we see as cross wires or cross hair or cross lines in the microscope. That thin glass plate is called reticle or sometimes as graticule. It is stuck by a glue on an annular ring-like support mounted inside the tube. If the cross lines are seen clear and sharp, then the reticle is under proper focus. If they look blurred, then keep looking. Hold the eyepiece at its top and slide it gently up and down. The sharpness changes. Stop when it looks sharpest. Leave the eyepiece and it stays there. Let us know about magnification. Now you have understood that the magnification of the image of the object takes place at two stages. First, the objective magnifies it 10 times. That magnified image itself is further magnified at the eyepiece by a factor of 10. Hence, in all, it is 100 times magnified image what your eye perceives at the eyepiece end. Now, you must know that you won't get magnified image of each and everything that lies in front of the objective. No, the microscope can provide the magnified image of only that object or only a part of it which lies exactly at its focusing distance. Therefore, you still have the duty of moving the objective to the focusing distance from the object whose magnified image you are seeking. How do you do it? Meaning, how do you move the microscope to the focusing distance? It is done simply by turning what is called the rack and pinion motion knob. This is the rack and pinion motion knob. You can watch in this video how it works. Now let's understand the basic procedure followed in getting a magnified image of an object. First, the object is kept below the objective. Watching from one side of the TM, The microscope is moved downward slowly by turning this knob till the objective arrives close to the object. Say, a gap of about a centimeter between the two would do. Done. Now looking down through the eyepiece, the microscope is moved up slowly by turning the knob. First, what you see inside the microscope is all hazy. As the microscope keeps moving upwards, a rough image of the object begins to form. It becomes clearer and clearer and becomes clearest at some point. That's when the objective is exactly at the focusing distance from the object. Stop the movement. This is the basic procedure in focusing. However, sometimes it so happens that between two viewers, what's perfect focusing for one may not be agreeable to the other. A slight readjustment is needed to be done at personal level. That's because of the difference in their own eye powers. I have experienced this occasionally with very few of my students. Here in this TM made exclusively for conducting the Newton-Stevens experiment, you can see a small assembly fixed to the TM below the microscope. Its upper part has a horizontal circular metallic frame with a handle. It appears almost like a lens, but it is not. The handle is loosely held in a vertical support in which it can turn. Within the circular frame there is a plain glass plate. It is simply a reflector meant to reflect the incident sodium light down when it is adjusted for an inclination of 45 degrees to the direction of the incident light. Below the reflector, there is a black ring enclosure that looks like a small well with 3 tightening screws on the top. By releasing the screws, its upper ring can be taken out. Inside the well, you will be keeping the combination of plano-convex lens with its curved back on a plain glass plate. You are likely to be given a plano-convex lens of radius of curvature 1 meter. That means its curved back is simply a part of a big sphere of radius 1 meter, and you can think that the lens you have is a fine chip from the surface of that big sphere. But you know, for a sphere that big, its chip of the size of the lens will have its curved surface that looks roughly the same as a plane surface. If you are given this type TM, you are given the plain glass plate that is also circular and of exactly the same size. That leads to some confusion about which one is actually the lens, and you may even end up arranging the things wrong. However, you can do it right by knowing them all right this way. Now, to distinguish between the two, you can test by seeing the light source through each one and move it in front of the source. See, in this case, the image of the tube is not affected when the glass is moved. Hence, it is the plain glass plate. Next, you take the other piece and repeat. This time, you will see that the image is affected. Therefore, it is the plano-convex lens. After that inspection, you must do this. As it is a necessity with any optics experiment, you must wipe clean all the glass surfaces through which the light makes its way. Therefore, wipe the surfaces of these two clean by a soft cloth. Also wipe the surfaces of the reflector, the objective lens and the eyepiece lens. Keep the plano-convex lens with its curved back sitting on the plain glass plate, but to ensure you have done it alright, you can check it this way. Give the upper one a small rotation. If the arrangement is alright, it rotates freely. See here, it does rotate freely. This is only when the curved surface of the lens is lying on the plane surface. Hence the arrangement is alright. Now let's know how it shows up with the wrong arrangement. That is with the plane face of the lens on the plane surface. In this case, see, it is jerky and not at all rotating. Hence it is wrong. In order to make it alright, you will have to overturn the lens and keep it on the other plate. Anyway, give a check after overturning also. Normally you will observe a free rotation this time, so it's done. But say even then also you observe a jerky movement, then the obvious conclusion is, unfortunately, the two circular glass plates that you have both are plain glass plates and neither of them is a lens. But have a confirmation anyway. Check again by holding each piece against a light source and decide. If you happen to have both pieces as lenses, you will miss the sticky movement effect irrespective of which way you arrange. That pair is also not alright. You do need one of them to be a plain glass plate. Keeping the lens on its curved back on the plain glass plate, transfer the pair into the well. Put back its top and close by its 3 screws. This is the carriage to which the microscope is fixed. It slides on a guideway when pushed by hand. You see a lever there. By turning it in the clockwise sense, you can clamp the carriage to the guideway. Now, let's see about the prior arrangements. To begin with, make the carriage free for movement. Release it if it is under clamp. Then gently push it by hand so that it comes to a position at which the axis of the microscope will be through the center of the lens or at least very near to it. This position you see here. Here by visual inspection you see that the axis of the microscope is through the center of the lens. In the right side picture it could be observed a bit more clearly. This is a very critical requirement. If the axis happens to lie far away from the center of the lens, then you will miss to see the rings despite proper focusing. It's because the microscope's view is along the axis. The center of the lens is where the center of the ring system lies. So, if the axis passes through the center of the lens, you will have the center of the ring system in your view. The rings become thinner and thinner with increase in radius and also get crowded. When the microscope's axis is far away from the center of the lens, its view will be focused on this region where the rings are so thin and cramped. You hardly recognize that there are any rings at all. It looks the same as if there are no rings. But you will be searching for the rings and get frustrated by not observing them. Therefore, start the things alright with roughly a 45-degree forward inclination. Though it is done to an approximation, you will not be too much off the mark. That's good enough to see the rings clearly later. Afterwards, you can easily navigate the microscope to arrive at the center of the ring system. Therefore, up to your confidence, by visual inspection, get the microscope's axis through the center of the lens first. Okay, having done that, now how you get the rings? It's simple. There are just two requirements to be met. First one is to get the reflected light into the microscope with maximum intensity. Second one is to move the objective to the focusing distance. Now let's see about the first step. Keep the TM in front of the sodium lamp such that light falls normally to its front. Looking at the reflector from outside the microscope, turn its plane to a forward inclination of roughly 45 degrees by visual inspection to the incident light like this. Then, looking through the eyepiece, adjust the inclination of the reflector by rotating its handle gently over a small angle of 5 to 10 degrees till you see some light. Stop at the maximum illumination. Now let's consider the possible problems. Problem number 1. What if you don't see any light at all, no matter what you do with the reflector? Then you must still try turning it over a slightly larger angle, maybe over plus or minus 10 to 15 degrees more than the earlier times. You are likely to see the light. But then also if you don't see any light, what next then? Remember, this is the very first problem that may bother you when you take up this experiment. That's alright. No need to panic. Everything is alright. It only means that you hadn't oriented the TM properly and the reflector is not facing the sodium light properly. The two are now a sort of strangers. Now you need to make them to look at each other face to face. To do that, follow this method. First of all, be sure that the plane of the reflector is inclined at nearly 45 degrees to the incident light. Then, while looking into the eyepiece, hold the TM at its base in a mild grip. Turn the entire TM both ways a bit around itself like this. You will see some light that passes across each time. That's enough. Now you know roughly in which direction to look out for the light. Adjust the position till you catch the best light and then stop. Now maximize the brightness by working on the reflector again. You will be having an illumination more or less like this. A bright light along with a plus mark of the crossed lines. Next is to focus the microscope onto the reflector to get the rings. Now watching from outside the microscope, slowly turn the rack and pinion motion knob so as to get the objective end close to the reflector without disturbing its 45-degree inclination. A centimeter gap above the reflector will be just good. Take care. See that the objective doesn't hit the reflector. If it does, then you will have to repeat the first step again. Now look through the eyepiece and slowly start moving the microscope upwards. After a certain point, a hazy ring pattern starts appearing. With further movement up, the pattern grows more and more distinct. Stop when you see a neat, clear-cut ring pattern. But the ring system that you see may be seen with or without its central part. Even if you see only its peripheral parts, that's enough now. We can reach its center easily. But what if the bright light doesn't change to the rings at all? Don't worry. Perhaps you have not moved the objective up sufficiently. Therefore, raise the microscope slowly up by operating the rack and pinion motion knob. Then the rings appear in the view. But what if you don't see the rings even after moving the microscope sufficiently up? That's a different problem which we shall name as problem number 2. When you encounter this problem, check the inclination of the reflector. You will see the reflector's upper edge leaning not to the front but to its back like this. How it got there? It happened because while you were trying to get light, you would have turned the reflector so much that its upper end got tilted to its backward leaning posture. The trouble is, you do get a flash of light when you try to see a reflection for this side of inclination also, in fact a very bright one. But it's of no use. Why it's so? It's because in that position it is not inclined at 45 degrees. Please note that it is at 135-degree inclination to the direction of the incident light. You can see it clearly in the image here. It's actually a pitfall because there is no light going down for incidence on the lens. Entire incident light is lifted up. Without knowing what mistake has occurred, you will be trying to get the rings with this orientation. Obviously, you will never get them no matter what you do. For the sake of comparison, both types of inclinations where you get light into the microscope are shown here. You must correct the wrong inclination by turning the reflector to forward inclination and then repeat both the steps to get the rings. But there is still a possibility of another strange problem. Let's call it problem number 3. Let us see about that one now. The problem is, after you focus, you see not the circular fringes but a flow pattern of wavy fringes. What is that? It happens so when the lens is lying on its flat face on the plain glass plate. Therefore, be careful in the beginning itself not to commit this mistake. But if you see wavy fringes, correct the setup. Open the lens enclosure, flip the lens, keep it now properly at the glass plate and close. Again repeat both the steps. Then you will view the rings. However, check whether the central spot is dark. That's what it should be. But instead, if it's a bright spot surrounded by a dark circle, then it is not the right one. That's our problem number 4. It may look like this, a central bright spot in the ring system. Nothing to worry. You can easily correct it in a matter of seconds. First, let's understand the reason why a bright spot appeared at the center. It is simply because of some minute dust particles that are trapped between the lens and the glass plate. They hold the lens up, separated from the plate below. Because of this, the light rays go an extra path before getting reflected as compared to when the lens was in contact with the plain glass plate. This extra path gets added uniformly to all the rays right across the plane of reflection. And it is just right to convert all the dark rings into bright ones and the bright to dark ones in the respective places, and the central dark spot also becomes bright. But that is not the correct fringe system. How do you set it right? It's simple. We can overcome the problem this way. Keep looking through the microscope and gently tap the lens enclosure like this. The lens shakes and jerks. Under its weight, the dust particles give way. The lens then settles, touching the glass plate at its center. As you keep tapping, you can see how the bright central spot changes into a dark one. Now you have it, the correct Newton's ring system for a reflected light as you see in this image. But sometimes you may have a different problem. When you get the rings there at the center of the ring system, it should be dark, alright, but instead of a small dark spot like how you see in this image, there could be one with an unusually large area that looks almost like a big disk. That's problem number 5. It's because of only one reason. After you pasted the lens in the plain glass plate inside the enclosure, you had tightened the screws a bit too much. The tight grip stresses the lens inside. Its curved back tends to get flattened. Then instead of a point contact, its contact area extends, which results in the spreading of the central dark spot into a disk. Now, since the back of the lens is no more a part of the sphere, which it is supposed to be, both the thicknesses and sizes of the rings undergo a change. By making measurements on this system also, you do get some result, but it is not the actual radius of curvature of the lens. But after seeing that big central disk, what you need to do to correct is just this. Through the microscope, keep watching the ring system, check by slowly loosening each screw a bit and tightening it again, this time to a soft grip. You will see that the large central disk turns to a small dark spot by the time you complete doing this to all the 3 screws. With these 5 problems, I suppose all the possible problems are considered and their solutions understood as far as obtaining the correct ring system is concerned. Okay, now let's go to the next phase of the experiment. It's all to do with the measurements, but before starting any measurement, you must initialize 2 settings in the TM. One is for the HSR and the other one for the PSR. Let us see first about HSR. Look at the head scale in this video. This graduated big steel cylinder is called the drum, which has markings on it for the head scale readings. It lies on the right side of the TM for the position you take behind it as the performer. Now about the pitch scale. You can see the microscope is firmly fixed to a carriage in the TM. Let us now follow the pitch scale settings. Attached to the carriage, there is a small slopy metal piece that can slide alongside the pitch scale. The metal piece has a single reference mark with a 0 on its top. You can see a lever nearby this piece, by turning which you can clamp the movement of the carriage. When the clamp is applied, the movement of the carriage gets coupled to the drum. So the carriage, the microscope and the metal piece all together become one unit and slide alongside the pitch scale whenever the drum is turned. Here, the reference line below the 0 mark is the pointer whose position on the pitch scale corresponds to the pitch scale reading. What about setting for the head scale reading? As I mentioned now, when the carriage is under clamp, a rotation of the drum gets linked to a corresponding movement of the carriage and in turn to the movement of the microscope. As the drum is turned, the microscope moves laterally at the rate of 1 millimeter for one complete rotation of the drum. To start with, release the clamp. The drum becomes independent and free. Turn it to get the head scale 0 against the reference 0, the way it is shown here. Leave it there. Now let's see how to link HSR to PSR. The carriage is also free now. Push it a little either to left or right so as to get the pointer perfectly aligned with the nearer division. Apply the clamp. Now you see that for a perfectly coincident PSR, HSR is 0 and that's how we want it to be. In this image, you see that PSR is 1.4 cm and HSR is 0. The preliminary arrangement is over and it is perfect. You should not release the clamp till the observations are completed. Now onwards, any bit of rotation of the drum causes a change in HSR and PSR as per the standard rules. That's about lateral movement of the microscope. But we need to move it longitudinally also, not for taking any measurements, but to bring the intersection point of cross wires to the center of the ring system. How do we get its longitudinal movement? Using this knob which is on the carriage. If you turn this knob, you see the microscope moves longitudinally. Usually when you get the rings under focus, you will not be having the intersection of the cross lines ready at the center of the ring system. You can now get it done by a coordinated movement of turning the drum and turning the knob. After you get it done, you will have a nice picture in which the whole ring system in 4 equal parts in the 4 quadrants created by the normally intersecting cross lines. Like this. But you can also do it manually by releasing the clamp and pushing it in the direction you want and operating the knob. But afterwards, you need to set the two reference zeros before applying the clamp. Now let's move on to the observations part. So far it was regarding settings. Coming to the operation part, let's follow the headings in the tabular column shown here. Please note that you will be counting only the dark rings for all the observations. For instance, sixth ring means that is the sixth dark ring, counting 0 for the central dark patch without considering the bright rings. Remember, you will be taking readings by making the longitudinal cross line tangential to the concerned dark rings. But if you see a fringe to be pretty thick, then you can bring the intersection point of the crosswire to the central part on its thickness spread. However, in the examination, you follow the way you did in your regular class. As you see in the tabular column, your first reading is for the 12th ring left side. Please note here LHS means the left hand side, that means to your left side. Now it's a bit unusual about how you take the first reading. First, you will start by moving the intersection point of the crosswire from the center of the ring system towards your left by turning the drum. Count the center spot as 0. As you pass across the rings, keep counting only the dark rings, but you must go a bit beyond the 12th ring, say up to the 14th ring and stop. Do nothing there. Simply reverse the movement and return to the same 12th ring till the longitudinal crosswire becomes tangential to the ring. Now you are at the left side of the 12th ring. That's where you make your first observation. This back and forth movement that beyond the 12th ring, which is rather brief, you are required to do only once in the beginning in order to overcome what is known as the backlash. The backlash occurs in the movement of the carriage. In micrometer type TM, you have this problem. The instrument develops a kind of dragging called backlash in a short period of time after its usage is begun. It's due to the wear and tear of the threads of the micrometer screw which the carriage holds in its grip by its own complementary threads. However, by adopting this procedure of setting the carriage into prior motion in the left to right direction, we overcome the problem due to backlash. In the vernier type TM, you will not encounter this problem, but there you will have the task of identifying the coinciding vernier division every time you take a reading. Be very careful in counting the ring number properly. Take readings for the 12th ring and enter them into the tabular column. Then some students go across the 12th ring right side for taking reading. That's not the way to do. You must move on only to the 10th ring on the same side, that is the left side, next for the 8th ring on the same side, and so on and so forth up to the 2nd ring. Then you must cross over to the other side and start taking reading from the 2nd ring, then for the 4th ring till you arrive at the 12th ring. Not just that, while you are progressing from 12th ring left to the 12th ring right, you must compulsorily be moving only in the left to right movement with stoppings only wherever needed. Never overshoot the halting point and then try to move back to the left side, maybe to check your reading or to correct the position, etc. If you do it even a little, done. Backlash error conquers your observations and spoils the entire show. So it must be a unidirectional movement in the left to right direction from the 12th ring left side reading to 12th ring right side reading, and accordingly filling the slots in the tabular column. In the examination, don't forget to get your observations approved by the examiner in the meanwhile after noting the first or second reading. Then before you undertake evaluating the radius of curvature, there is a way to know whether everything has been carried out properly. If all your observations and calculations are correct, then the three values of dm square minus dn square in the right extreme column in the tabular column will be almost same. After this, finally, you will find the radius of curvature of the given plane of convex lens by substituting the required values into the equation for R, the radius of curvature. Remember, you are given the wavelength of the sodium light as data. That's all with the experiment. Now, as an aid for your reference, I am providing here some more information in the next few slides. You can understand the basics of the experiment by going through the matter given here. This is continuation of the previous page displayed earlier to this slide. This is the figure for the setup. As mentioned here at the top, this is how the least count of the TM is calculated. Finally, about how you calculate R, the radius of curvature of the lens given to you. Here are some Viva questions provided for you to go through. This is the continuation of the Viva questions which also you can go through. You must note that while conducting Viva, it is like a quiz. The questions are generated by the individual teacher according to the personal choice, which may or may not be the same as that by another teacher. Therefore, by no means this set of questions given here is unique. However, by preparing to answer these questions, it may help you to think of answers for similar questions. Also, the basic knowledge that you get out of it may help you to think of answers for questions other than those listed here. Beyond this, you may put your questions or opinions in the comment sections for this video. Remember, listen to the instructions given by the examiner carefully at the start of the examination. As a preparation before the examination, practice drawing the figure and tabular column, memorize the formula, make a calculation once of the radius of curvature of the lens by taking the values from your physics practical record. That's about your preparation. That's all, students. I hope you found this video helpful in your preparation for the practical examination. Thanks for watching.